Welcome back to Unmute Yourself. I'm your host, Jennifer Carter, and this podcast is about lifting the curtain on leadership, purpose, and the real stories behind women who dared to do things differently. We'll talk about how they found their path, the struggles along the way, and how they built something that truly matters. These are normal people doing extraordinary things because I want you to know you are extraordinary too. My guest today is Kaitlynn Helm, a Chief Operating Officer, Strategic Operator, and unapologetic advocate for women asking for more before they feel ready. She's built her career in the operational backbone of organizations, finance, compliance, people operations, scaling systems, serving as a trusted executive partner across startups and established companies. She currently serves as COO at a startup where she's led massive turnarounds in financial clarity, compliance, and growth. But what makes Kaitlynn's voice so powerful isn't just what she's done, it's how she thinks. She challenges the idea that women must feel worthy before they advocate for themselves. Instead, she argues that self-worth often comes after we speak up, negotiate, and demand better. Kaitlynn, I am so glad you're here. Welcome.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, your career has been deeply operational. I think you know a little bit about everything, probably a lot about many things. But how did you end up becoming so passionate about advocacy and self-worth in the process?
Yeah, I think I became as passionate as I am kind of on from two fronts. One, from my own experience in seeing what valuing myself in real time or undervaluing myself even in real time, what the immediate outcomes of that were, but then also seeing some very strong, fantastic, competent, capable women I know being undervalued every day.
Now, was there a moment in your career when you realized that you were being undervalued or that you were negotiating against yourself?
Yeah, I think that I really didn't know what I was doing when I first got into the professional world. And I was just kind of told this is what you're worth and this is what your value is. And I just kind of accepted that at face value and trusting that the person, I was negotiating with, the person hiring me was doing the best they could for me, which is certainly not the case. And it's never going to be the case. A business and a company has a job to itself, not just to its employees. And I learned that when I got more ingrained on the operational side, and you kind of like see behind the curtain and that Oz isn't as big and scary as he seems. But when I was kind of first in my startup adventures, which does give you a lot more insight. So I'll say that seeing more behind the curtain in a startup environment also gives a lot more insight earlier on in your career. But when I realized kind of after a lot of frustration, I finally was like, you know what, I want more, I need more, I'm gonna demand more. And I finally did kind of like at my wit's end. And then I got it. I was elated, but more than elated, I was frustrated because I didn't just ask for what I thought that, it would be nice if I got this. I went for the moon. I went for the stars just because I was just absolutely ready to go. And the fact that I heard a yes at the end of my ask made me so angry with myself because I knew that when I was moving into that higher point of pay and value, it wasn't because I would be doing something more or different. I'd be doing the same thing I had been doing, but at a different price point. Meaning that I could have been, I could have and should have had that value assigned to me per se, for a really long time. And, if you allow someone to undervalue you and walk over you, they will essentially. And as much as, we hope that our managers are looking out for us and our companies are looking out for us, they can only kind of do that to a certain degree. And at the end of the day, you are your best and only true advocate.
Now, I appreciate that you are your best advocate. And, you've talked about
Yeah.
waiting to feel worthy. So, how did you work through
Yeah.
that until you
Yeah.
actually felt worthy?
I think again, working in operations, which can be a very like Swiss Army knife of tasks and hats and seeing a lot of how things work, I realized that I really had no right to kind of dictate like what I was worth either promotion wise, title wise, salary wise, and that truly me overthinking this and overthinking that. And if I just did a little bit more here, that I was negotiating essentially against myself. And I have no business doing that. I don't have a degree or a background in valuing people, in valuing compensation, and that my own feelings were essentially getting in the way of my own worth, and that I didn't need to keep saying, well, if I just do X, Y, and Z, and I just, get the master's degree and I get the certifications and I put in more time and I overextend myself, then I'm going to have this level of worth that I'd like to have, or then I'll see if what someone else thinks I'm worthy of. And so removing myself from that situation and just saying, you know what, I can see that the market data, when I'm just, a simple Google search, there's plenty of information out there that'll show that, for Texas, for this region, for this size company, these are the salary ranges. Ask for the top. Why would you not ask for the top, right? If this is the range available that the data is saying, then ask for that. And then when you ask that question, one, you're removing your own feelings and getting out of your own way. But two, you're kind of gauging like, you know what? Obviously, I would like to be at the top of whatever this range is. Am I there or am I not there? And the company will tell you, your manager will tell you if you are or you're not, essentially. And I think from then you also open up a conversation to say, this is where I would like to be. You're telling me I'm not there yet. So what are the keys? What are the tools to success to help me get there versus kind of like sitting in your own brain and negotiating yourself to death and trying to figure out what the secret sauce is, right? The secret sauce doesn't have to be that secret. You could just ask and get out of your own head. So I think that really eliminating this idea that like you have to have proved yourself or killed yourself to do something or be worthy enough to yourself first is just really getting in the way, particularly for women, not just succeeding, but also being given the success essentially that we've already earned, that we are already inherently worthy of being valued. So I think, again, taking your own feelings and emotions out of that because they're not reliable sources of information, particularly if you're an overthinker and an overachiever, that you're never going to be a good source of reliable information to dictate what you should or should not ask for. And so I tell all of my friends, particularly my women friends, and I have to remind myself still of this, that you just shoot for the moon always. Because why not? Why would you not go for that?
Well, why do you think women don't go for it? And how do you get them over that
Um,
roadblock?
yeah, I think that's a tough one. And I think that, growing up and particularly in kind of a corporate world and kind of starting to rub shoulders with more corporate women. And there was a lot of conversations that I would hear about, working on self-worth and confidence and the different tools and ways to go about that because there is such a systemic issue and problem with that. And I think that when we have been so conditioned to some degree to undervalue ourselves, it makes sense that the first thing we would think of is to work on learning how to better evaluate yourself, and that confidence can like move you forward. However, my hot take is that to some degree, screw your confidence and lack of confidence, screw your like lack of self-worth. Hopefully get there one day, but in the meantime, there is money on the table. There is money on the table that you were leaving behind. So truly stop, get rid of the noise of I have to work harder to kill myself. I have to like compare myself to other people and comparing myself to myself, even my better than I was yesterday. You have to just kind of throw all of that out the window and just say, you know what? Chat GPT has told me it's good to have a conversation about raises every 6 months. Then you know what? If it's been 6 months, you better have that conversation. Just completely, I think, take yourself out of that because you have to tell yourself, I have been conditioned to some degree. Society has told me that I have to wait to be valued, or I have to value myself before demanding value. And I just don't think that women can afford to wait to even value themselves. Do the work, sure, and let's undo a lot of that conditioning. But in the meantime, you just go for it. And I think that the more you can take emotion out of it, the easier that will be. And for me, as someone who is more analytically brained and very like task oriented, and kept comparing myself to the version before and, have I done X, Y, and Z in order to become and to say like, "Hey, I've done these things, so value me more." Even that was getting in my own way, so from an analytical, less kind of like feeling perspective, and so just telling myself, "Those things don't matter, I'm gonna continue to try and work on myself, but look at asking for more and demanding value, not as saying, 'Well, I have convinced myself that I am more valuable,' because we need to work on that still, but this is like a way to actually get more information and kind of like a data gathering task. Right? You're going to go and I'm going to see what happens when you ask for X, Y, and Z, because you will find out really quickly, you know, if you that ask answered or not answered. If they're going to say yes, if they're going to say no. And then if they say no, then at least you now have that actual data point. It's not something you're making up in your own head. So I think making it a data gathering session and saying every 6 months, I'm going to have a conversation with someone to talk about how I can go to the next level. And it has nothing to do with what I think I have or have not done, and really getting someone else's input will help get your own feelings out of the way of that. And hopefully, eventually get that insecurity and anxiety out of the way, because the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And that's with anything, right? It's like riding a bike. The more often you do it, the easier it is. So I tell, my friends and other women I've worked with that you don't need to get better at asking you and like, prepare yourself to death. You just need practice. So just do it. Just think of it as practice.
Kaitlynn, how do you recommend detaching emotionally from the word no?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good question because, and let's say you get to the point where you do the asking and you hear the no, and then it feels like, okay, well, now I just got confirmation that I don't have the value that I was hoping I would have. Again, I think looking at it as a data gathering. And I think the great thing about hearing no is that you're going to have some kind of physical reaction to that. Right. So if the reaction is, well, that, I tried it. It was a no. I guess it is what it is. Maybe you didn't actually really want it as much. And maybe you just need to get clearer then about what things you want and what you want to ask for. And if your reaction to the no is heartbreak or devastation, that's okay. Sit in that. Live in that for a minute, but realize that your reaction means that you want something. You disagree inherently somewhere inside with that person's no. And I think that lean into that confidence of you don't agree with their no. And there's confidence I think that should come and can come from that. And so that if you don't agree with their no and you're devastated by their no, then you start asking why. All right, I can't get here. Now, is it because my company or my manager can't support me? And that's going to dictate maybe my next move in general. Maybe I need to go to a different department, a different company, to go somewhere where I can be valued, where I think I should be valued. Or, you ask why and you find out what you need in order on paper for that company or that manager to be to support you the way that you feel you deserve to be supported. I don't think that's still a lot easier said than done. I think again, the more practice you have with that, and asking people, and maybe you practice with a friend, right, or a family member, or Chat GPT,
Right.
and you practice it that way. But I think that you just keep practicing.
So, how do you define self worth and value for yourself?
That's a good question. Um, hmm. I don't know that I've fully found the answer to that.
Yeah.
What I know, I guess what I have learned and how I define it now for myself, the self-worth and value is that I more likely than not undervalue myself. And so I know, and I think most people do, again, particularly women. So keeping that as like a factual point in mind, knowing that I am worth more today than I am probably willing to admit yet. And again, working on that. But I also have come to define my self worth and value as I deserve to feel happy and I
Yeah.
deserve to not put myself through pain in order to feel like I deserve to be somewhere and show up somewhere. For a long time, I felt like the more reliable I was, the more I gave of myself, which starts to become painful at some point. The more you give and the less you put into yourself. But I felt like the more I succeeded and the more I climbed, that was supposed to hurt. Essentially,
Uh,
that it was supposed to be painful. I was supposed to twist myself up, and it just like it made sense that this is harder because I've achieved more success. So and I think the only way I learned that that was not the case is when I got to a point of burnout that I could no longer avoid and kind of treat as background noise.
how did
So
you
I
know
think
you
that
were
that value was probably learned the hard way.
Yeah. No, it made me wanna hold one thought for a moment. It's like, how did you know you were burned out?
I knew I knew I was burned out and it wasn't just kind of like a thing to casually say. It wasn't just that I was tired. It was that I mean, I was starting to have some chronic manifestations of burnout, and by that I mean I was having a lot of physical pain. I was getting my headaches were turning to migraines, and they were happening more and more often. My work-life balance was non-existent, and it kinda got to a place where I was hardly taking care of myself, but I was doing so much for my company that I just thought, this is great. I'm doing better things for that. Like it'll come to a place where I'll be able to take care of myself again, that the migraines will go away, the sleep will get better. None of those things will happen unless you prioritize them, though, it
Right.
turns out. And I remember thinking that at some point, the migraines all of a sudden went away. I was less stressed. And I thought that this was like a point of growth for me. And actually, what had happened is that I had just completely detached. And I just cared less about what was happening, and I thought that that meant I had, like, risen above, but it
Uh,
was absolutely a form of, like, of self like, my brain trying to protect itself, and I realized then when it became so detached that it became actually difficult to work and put out my level of work that I was accustomed to, is when I realized that there was kind of a problem.
yeah.
And that and when we were talking about value, that's when I realized that I had undervalued the output I was, and the work I was doing so much by feeling like I just had to keep doing more. And this has probably been over the past year or so that I've had to learn this lesson and realize that there is capacity and there is capability, and saying and acknowledging what my capacity is did not make me any less capable. It does not make me any less capable. At the time, I did not see the difference though. So,
Oh my gosh, right. And I'm sure there are people listening that are truly identifying with what you had to say. It has to be painful. You're climbing, you're doing all of this work, you're stretching yourself so thin until you basically collapse into apathy and
yep.
illness. So, what
Mhm.
has changed, if
Yep.
anything, since you have faced that burnout as far as how you evaluate your worth and value?
Again, I would say that I realized that success doesn't have to mean pain, and I don't have to be in pain in order to be successful or to prove my worth or to prove my value. And actually, I'm devaluing myself, which is one more way that women, especially, we're devaluing ourselves if we feel like we have to be put through pain and stretch then in order for the world or someone else to say, ah, you are successful, because you just dug yourself into a ditch for the rest of us to rise. That doesn't need to
Oh,
be the
yes.
case.
Right.
In fact, I think that not only are you valuing yourself when you don't put yourself through that, is, and again, particularly as women, you're helping other women realize that they don't have to achieve success or a certain level of value or whatnot, by not taking any sick days, and that there is more inherent value in being someone who can show up every day for both their work selves and their personal selves and their family self and their friend self is much more valuable than working yourself to death.
Wow. So how do you think we go ahead and build careers that don't require, what do you call it? You call it sacrificial ambition or chronic exhaustion, right? As the
Sacrificial
entry fee.
ambitions built, yes. Yeah, exactly, and building that sustainable ambition, versus the sacrificial ambition. I think that this was so hard at the time, and again, it's easier to see now that I've gone through it. But I think you have to realize that self-care is not just a flim flam, like fun word to say. It's for me, what I now frame it as operational is that it is part of your to-do list. It's not like what happens when there's time left over, because at some point there's no time left over if you don't make the time for it. So I think realizing that self-care is operational, it's part of your infrastructure. It's that very like stereotypical putting your mask on before someone else's mask. They don't say that on airplanes for fun. It apparently is a metaphor all aspects of life. So I think realizing that it is truly just that important and to value self-care, and what self-care means to me is balance. So are you, doing the medical things you need to do for yourself on a recurring basis? For me, that meant actually going to like a doctor once a year, or, and making the time for those things and putting time on my calendar to say, you know what, I'm not going to be available during this time because I've got to do this other operational work on myself. I think that if you don't get really clear on what those things look like for you to establish balance, that it's really easy for someone else not to respect those boundaries. So getting clear about what self-care and balance means for you is important. And then when you show up to work or to an interview or what have you, that you're defining for your manager in that company, like these are my parameters. I need time off to, I spend time with my kids, or I need time to go to the chiropractor. I need time to do X, Y, and Z. People aren't robots. They're going to understand that. But unless you prioritize it, they're not going to. Right? People are going to assume that you're taking care of your own business. So if you don't speak up about it, they're not going to know to respect it. So get clear on what those things are that you need for balance, and don't feel ashamed about them. I think I
Mm.
also felt really ashamed that I needed to, go see a chiropractor once a month or what have you,
Whoa.
and that I needed a certain amount of and once you kind of put your own ego aside, and realizing that it's not soft, it's not that you're weak, it's that I'm a human being that requires certain, sustainable acts, sleeping and eating and drinking water and going to the doctor and or meditating, whatever that looks like for you. There is actually so much strength in that, and I think for those people who find it hard to do that because they feel like it's weak and makes them look bad, I think reevaluating, saying, why is this hard to do? And maybe it's hard to do because it has value. Right? It's hard to do because it feels not easy. And if it was easy, then maybe you'd find it easier to do. And because it's not easy, um, I think that people tend to not do it. But I think that's your argument for doing it, because at some point, self-care is no longer an option if you are not prioritizing at all. It will force you to make
Right.
it a priority if you don't, weave that in.
And you are well under the age of 40, and you've already learned this lesson. So, how do you, as a very, very bright, young, capable professional, stand up to ingrained work culture that's like, go, 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 do more with less? How do you do that?
Mhm. I'm
Right.
telling you that I absolutely, like, fell for all of that, and I just fell for it because, like, I felt like I had to, and, like, that just sucks. Like, I really enjoyed hustling, and I still enjoy hustling. So I think when you enjoy hustling and the work's telling you, "Go, go, go," you're like, yeah, you, like, get caught up in it, you know? Navigating against that now, I think the world, I will say, I feel like there's been a little bit of a shift in the world, and that it's become a little bit easier and it's a little bit more like socially acceptable. I still think it's really hard to do. All I can say is that when people keep hearing, and I kept hearing it, that like self-care is important, balance is important, like doing all these things is important, and I tuned it out. I'm just what I would tell people is stop tuning it out. And I wish I could have, like, told myself much earlier on to stop tuning it out. Sometimes you have to learn it the hard way, and I just hope that I think that one of the ways that people get better at not tuning that out and realizing how important it is by conversations like this, right? If we're having these conversations and we keep pushing it and we keep touting that message, that people will start to hear it and it becomes a part more and more part of our culture, our work culture and not just work culture because I think that you can dive into anything that requires output. So, as a mom or a caregiver in general, you can feel like to do the best you can do, you've just got to give it all. But again, if you're not putting your mask on first, by giving your all, you do literally give your all at some point until there's nothing left. So yeah, I think the only way to combat this is that you keep having conversations and candid conversations about what it means to not have balance and what it means to keep hustling when you've got nothing left to hustle with. And that you can be successful and balanced, and honestly, that the more balanced you are, probably the more success you will ultimately have. Because I think about the times that I worked to the bone or I gave to the bone and I missed out on, a family outing, or maybe I was out, visiting for Thanksgiving, but I had China calls at 2 a.m. that I just felt like I had to say yes to, and I couldn't say, you know what, no, this is the time that I'm not working.
Right.
And granted, there are times when you've got to give more than maybe your boundaries will allow, but if it becomes more of a practice and a lifestyle that you're not respecting your own boundaries, then you don't have boundaries. And if I had the family events I have missed out on, or the stress I had when I was hanging out with friends, or the amount of like migraines that put me out, or maybe slowed down my work, maybe I still worked through them, but how much more successful could I have been had I come to the table a well-rounded human being that was fulfilled in their friendships and their family and
Mhm.
because of sleep and drink water that day.
6 hours of sleep and water? Oh my g random
And
thought for you.
water?
Oh my
Madness. Who
god.
knew?
Random thought for you. If
Yeah.
you were to wave your magic wand and have your own company, right?
Mhm.
What would some of those practices look like that you would put in place as the leader to make sure that your team members were able to have balance?
I think that's a great question. So I mean, I've got direct reports now, and something that we've pushed, but I would certainly push more if it was, maybe my own company was, I think minimum time off should be mandatory. I think that even, the healthiest of people who never need a sick day need time off. I think that, check-ins, more communication I find is better than less communication. So even now and really the past few years, I've made it a habit of mine to set up recurring check-ins with people. And that's not just to like evaluate performance, is purely I show up and I say, hey, how are you? How's it going? What are you excited about, currently, whether that's in the office or outside the office, anything that, to share or not share, right? Whatever you want to share. And what are you struggling with that I could help with? And I
Right.
think just like opening up dialogue and being really honest about where someone stands, and which I think also, the person kind of in that more like position of power has to offer that first, I will say. I think that when you go into a meeting with a boss, you feel like you wanna show up as your best, most structured self and like, "I have no pain, everything's wonderful, all I wanna do is give to the company," in this very, like,
Robot,
robotic, kind of, way,
corporate
but
Barbie, fembot, yes.
if yeah, if manage yes, exactly, corporate Barbie. But I think that if you lead by kind of example and are like, "You know what? I know what it's like to be tired and my washing machine broke and my cat threw up everywhere and, I've got a sick family member and we've all been there." So I think if you kind of like show a little bit of vulnerability first for your direct reports and say that, "You know what? Life freaking happens. I understand life happens for you also, wildly enough." And that kind of creates this level of trust that I think a lot of employees don't necessarily have for good reason, to be fair, with their managers and their companies. So if it were me, establishing trust and vulnerability would be priority number one. Leading by example and taking time off and setting boundaries so that other people feel empowered to do so also.
Okay, time is flying. So we're going to close with a few quick fire questions. So just answer with the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
So, what is a bold idea you've had recently that scares you just enough to try it?
Okay. I don't know. I'm nervous all of a sudden.
Oh, this is going to be
A
good then.
bold idea. So one of my former positions, I had to interview to replace myself, which is
Ooh,
not something I would ever really recommend doing. But it was my first time talking to other people in operations. Actually, I found that some companies, one, don't really have operations. And if they do, it's usually one person or a very small team. And what I found is that we're all kind of on an island on our own. And operations people, I mean, I'm sure the same is true for like software engineer people or HR people. Like I was like, wow, ops people are my people. And we all like have these same struggles and frustrations and things that we're excited about. And I have yet to be able to find kind of like a group or community of local ops people. So something that I have put on my like 2026 bingo card to start this
oh,
year
yes.
is an operations like supper club. Because I
I
also love
love
to eat
that.
and try new food, right? And
Love
so I
that.
thought it would be fun to try and local ops people and somehow mesh that with food and one day have like an operations supper club.
Very cool. I love it.
Because another thing is that we always have thank you. I am excited about it. It's been something I've been thinking about for probably the past year or so, and it's just been very back burner. And I told myself this is the year that I'm living life and life isn't living me. So I'm gonna like put down the things that I want to do and accomplish and work towards those things. And you always find kind of like CEO groups or entrepreneur groups, particularly in the Austin area, having a lot of startups, but you don't have a lot of that kind of like second in command, where are the groups for like COOs or just ops people? And so I think that would be kind of like a fun thing to
Love it.
start.
Fantastic. Okay, if you could unmute one topic people aren't talking about enough, what would it be?
Unmute one topic. I think that the self-care one is one that's like been growing traction over the years and I hope that it continues. But I think an unmute one for me would be that success doesn't have to hurt and that you don't have to kill yourself and bend over backwards to a way that you can't even contort into anymore in order to have value. Yeah, I wish I would have known much sooner that if something didn't feel good to the point where it was like, this isn't, growth doesn't always feel good. Growth can be uncomfortable,
Uncomfortable.
growth can be hard, but there's like a line for that. And I wish that people, particularly when we talk about women, we would talk about that fine line more. And because, I think generally speaking, for men, if something hurts and if something doesn't feel fair, you're going to hear about it very quickly. They're just not going to put up with it as much. And I think our tolerance, can I say bullshit?
Yeah,
Our
you
to-
say bullshit.
our tolerance for okay, our tolerance for bullshit is too high, and I wish that we would talk about bullshit tolerance should be much lower than it is.
Lower your bullshit tolerance. Success shouldn't hurt. We need t-shirts. Okay.
Yes,
What's
absolutely.
one
And
okay. What's one small daily habit
yeah,
that's had a big impact
I'm the
on your
same.
mindset?
Daily habit. I think that 2 things. I almost, like, hate admitting this one because I remember back in the day when I was like, self-care is soft and who has time for this? I thought that yoga was so crunchy and silly, and I remember trying yoga many moons ago, and at the end, you do this thing where you, like, lay down, it's called Shavasana.
Love it.
And, it's supposed to be very calming, and people would say that they love this, and I hated it so much because my brain just wouldn't stop. But in doing it more often, it has helped me force me to slow down because once you start a yoga class, if you, like, leave mid shavasana, like, you're gonna get daggers from the granola community. So I would just sit there and lay down and sit in it. And I will say, like, doing that, I don't do it on a daily basis. I'll admit that. But doing it on a weekly basis has brought a lot of intentional slowness to my week that has made an incredible difference in kind of working towards work life balance.
Love
So
it.
that one and something that I want to get better at this year, but I've done and I want to do on a more recurring basis is sitting down and having my own kind of like admin time to make sure that I'm looking at the things that I want to do for myself. So again, I've talked about this year doing me living life versus life living me, and I've created some things I wanna accomplish for myself that aren't, like, get a new certification, but are, like, more fulfilling, like, I wanna read these books, or I wanna, like, have this experience. I wanna take a conversational French class, and making sure that I'm sticking on top of those things, so do for my own kind of, like, admin work.
I love this for you. You've been thinking a lot about this. Okay. Let's see. If listeners could take one
Yes, I have.
an action, not just an idea, after hearing you speak, what should it be?
They should practice asking. They should absolutely and don't put it off any longer. Don't wait until you've got the perfect script or the correct amount of like years of time in service under belts or that certification. You should just ask and do it as again as a data quest and seeing what lands. And if that means that you start with ChatGPT, then start with ChatGPT. But you start asking for more today from someone somewhere.
And last question, what's one word that captures who you are becoming right now?
One word,
One word.
I guess what I hope I'm becoming, what I'm aiming towards becoming is balance. That as much as I've talked about self-worth and value doesn't necessarily mean I have like conquered this mountain. I do feel like I've learned a lot of hard lessons quickly, but I would say what I hope I'm becoming and what I'm telling myself I'm becoming is more balanced.
Well, Caitlin, thank you so much for sharing your story and your wisdom with us. I do want to
Yeah.
know, on a more personal note, what has it meant for you to share your story here on Unmute Yourself today?
Oh gosh, this has been really cool. I think what it has meant for me as again as someone who has asked for more and for value and doing those things, something even like this is nerve-wracking.
Of course.
So what it has meant for me is kind of saying I deserve to have a voice. I deserve to like show up and there is value in my experience. Yeah, and it also just feels like an honor always to be asked, right? So what it has meant for me is kind of like a value affirmation. So thank you for that. And also reminding myself that I already inherently come to the table with value and experience, and expertise.
I love it. How can listeners connect with you, Caitlin?
I'm on LinkedIn, so anyone can always reach out. And something I've been hearing a lot in different kind of talking events is that people who want help or advice or insight don't always ask for it. And so if someone wants to reach out, please reach out. And if there's someone that you think of when I say that, reach out to them because we always want to help, right? We always want to help the person behind us. So don't be afraid to ask someone for insight or advice. And if they don't have capacity, I'm sure that they can find someone who has the capacity for you.
Well, thank you so much, Caitlin, for sharing your story. And to everyone listening, thank you for
Yeah.
tuning in to Unmute Yourself. If today's conversation inspired you, please share this episode, subscribe, like, follow, and stay tuned for more stories of leaders creating work that truly fits and matters. Until next time, unmute yourself and step into the story only you can tell.